Tervetuloa. Now, Miriam, why did they laugh? I want to welcome you here. My name is Arthur Kistner. I'm the Chief Librarian of the Fitchburg Public Library, and I want to tell you that's the only Finnish word I'll try to pronounce today. But I do want to very briefly tell you that this is one of 12 programs that are being sponsored by the National Endowment for the Humanities, programs which involve 3 local agencies in the community. In addition to the library, there's the Fitchburg State College and the Fitchburg Historical Society. The project that we have been involved with not only involves the presentation of the Scholars program, which we're very pleased to have today for the Finnish community, but also the production of a sound slide program about each group. And you'll be hearing more about that a little later on for the Finnish community. Also, I do want to call to your attention that we have a special small exhibit today of some new Finnish books that are located here in the Fitchburg Public Library, but are also available in libraries in Westminster, Ashburnham, and Winchendon. I want to thank one of our staff, Linda Newman, who has been working on that project and is here today. Finally, I want to tell you that the most important ingredient in the planning for this program and for the slide program that you will be involved with is the local committee. And you have a very fine local committee that's worked very hard and has been led by a very fine, capable person, and it gives me great pleasure and a good deal of relief to turn the program over now to your chairperson, Miriam Leito.
Thank you, Arthur Kistner. Now, on behalf of the Finnish Committee, I shouldn't say Cultural Committee, this is our Finnish committee, made up of Finnish people from various Finnish groups in the community. This is, as Mr. Kistner mentioned, it is our 4th ethnic program. The Finns emigrated from a small country and came to this big United States. And it happened that those who settled here, the Finnish people who settled here, made it one of the biggest settlements, Finnish settlements in the United States at a certain point. It's changing. But as the Finns settled here, they tended to be isolated. First of all, because of the language barrier, which was, the Finnish language is very unique. And secondly, I think because they were self-sufficient, self-contained, socially and culturally. It's often said that, I heard it somewhere anyway, or read it somewhere, that when a group of Finns gets together, whether 20 or 100, they try to start up a drama club, an orchestra, a gym class, and some kind of a chorus. And this has been true throughout the communities in the United States, the Finnish communities. However, during the last 3 or 4 decades, that has been changing. I mean that the isolation has been changing. They are beginning to integrate into the community. And in fact, the Finnish community is beginning to diminish and is slowly melting into the American pot. We are delighted to present 3 scholars today and to share with you the Finnish part of the Fitchburg Mosaic. They represent the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generations of American Finns. And now I'm calling on Dr. Granger Browning, who is coordinator of this program, to present our speakers. Thank you.
Mrs. Leto, members of the Finnish American Committee, and this very beautiful Fitchburg audience. The title of the 12-part series promoted by the Fitchburg Public Library is The Fitchburg Mosaic, a portrait of a city's ethnic groups. And it is worthy of note that the Finnish Committee, in presenting this, the fourth of that series, is presenting it in concert with the Fitchburg Cultural Alliance Festival. This coincidence is appropriate, however, for there are two personalities associated with the program this afternoon who are practicing artists. We have first Dr. Liisa in the center, who is a gifted painter. And we have Mrs. Miriam Leto, who this evening is starring in a play in Landlord's Bins. Interestingly enough, this play has the amusing title of You Know I Can't Hear You When the Water is Running. And I think it's very intriguing. One of the major purposes of the Fitchburg Mosaic, and this particular goal is highly emphasized by the National Endowment for the Humanities, is to involve the Fitchburg community with eminent scholars in ethnic culture. And today we have the pleasure of having three ethnic specialists. There's first Jonathan Retila, who is, I guess, merging with we'll say a historic approach to the study of the Finnish in Fitchburg. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Millborough College, and his senior thesis was in keeping with this particular subject, and he is also the vice president of our highly respected Fitchburg Historical Society. We also have Dr. Paula Robbins, to my immediate left, who is the manager of the software technical writing and documentation for the Computer Vision Corporation in Bedford, Massachusetts. Dr. Robbins has, in effect, brought together a very exciting and a workable combination of the humanities, education, and business. And for, I guess, several years ago, while she was at Fitchburg State College, she was able to, I guess, put together this idea, this vision of hers, with many joint programs with the Fitchburg Chamber of Commerce. And these programs she presented with the Chamber were for the benefit of the entire community. And her versatility was, I guess, even more widely demonstrated when she, perhaps, as a matter of fact, as she left Fitchburg State College, and while she was here, as she conducted workshops in career planning, technical writing, industrial education, and in adult education in the United States, throughout the United States, and in Finland. Dr. Liisa was born in Finland, but I assume she thinks of Fitchburg as her adopted home. And several years ago, while she was at Fitchburg State College, she was able to put together, with the cooperation of the college and with the Hansel and Travel Agency, a guide that she developed for a cultural tour of Finland. Her major contribution, however, to the Fitchburg Mosaic is the publication of her forthcoming book, and the title of this book is The Fitchburg Imprint, which perhaps you know or aware of, the Finnish imprint, which you are aware of, is the theme of the program this afternoon. So it is with pride and it is with pleasure that the Finnish Committee, along with the Fitchburg Public Library, present our three scholars, Jonathan Ratila, Dr. ED.D, and Dr. Paula Robbins. Dr. Robbins will... Okay.
Thank you, Granger. It's a pleasure to be here. Tervetuloa. I'm going to be more or less the moderator and organizer of the group, and I will have fewer words to tell you. I would like to embroider some more on Miriam Lehto's comments. She said we are representative of the first, second, third, and fourth generation Finns. And while we did melt into the American scene, all three of us have come back to an active interest in our Finnish ethnic heritage fairly recently. And I think that perhaps programs such as this encourage all of us who are loyal, patriotic Americans to also appreciate our dual cultural heritage. I'd like to begin by speaking a little bit about the historical background, what Finland was like and why the immigrants came here, why they left their homes. As many of you know, Finland was part of Sweden until 1815, and therefore Swedish was the language of culture and of the ruling classes. Finnish was at that point spoken only by the peasants. Because of the fact that the ruling classes were Swedish, Finnish culture is Scandinavian, even though our anthropological background is not Scandinavian. In 1815, Finland was taken over by Tsarist Russia and became a Grand Duchy. The capital of Finland was moved from the old Swedish-speaking city of Turku to a new capital of Helsinki, which at that time was a little village. The Tsar built Helsinki up to be a second Russian capital. And if those of you who have seen the movie Reds will recall the square, which is supposed to be in Moscow, that is actually Helsinki, and it is the Russian capital square that the Tsar built in the 1820s. Helsinki became a center of arts and culture, rivaling St. Petersburg, which was about 500 miles away. During the 19th century, as part of the European Romantic Awakening, a new interest grew in Finnish language and folklore, culminating in the collection by Elias Lönnrot, a physician, of the Finnish mythical folk tales, the Kalevala. This was all part of a rise of Finnish nationalism during the second half of the 19th century. Democratic traditions had remained from the time of the Swedish rule of Finland. Up until then, the Russian rule was rather loose, so the Finns were able to maintain their identity. But by the end of the 19th century, the Tsar's rule began to tighten up, so that we had opposing forces of rising nationalism and stronger rule from the Russians. And obviously they were going to clash. As part of the nationalistic ferment, you had a great deal of interest in the arts in Finland. This was the time of our greatest Finnish composer, Jean Sibelius, and of the elder Saarinen, the architect, both of whom are internationally known. There were also economic conditions that caused a great deal of ferment in Finland. The Industrial Revolution came rather late to Finland, which was a poor country far in the north with a short growing season and an economy based on the forests, on fishing, and growing rye and potatoes. However, by the second half of the 19th century, many of the poor peasant farmers had begun to move to the cities and work in factories. There was not enough land to farm economically, and as has happened in many societies, the oldest son would maintain the farm and the younger sons would have to move off to the city. As a result, in the middle of the 19th century, there were famines, just as in Ireland and in other European countries. And so people had to leave in order to get enough to eat. They also wanted to run away to escape being conscripted into the Tsar's army. And at the same time, there were very lurid advertisements from the United States about the fact that the streets were paved with gold and there were lots of jobs and so forth here. And that is why many of our grandparents and great-grandparents left. The choice of their destination was determined by geography and economics. There was a need for unskilled labor in the mills of New England, the iron mines of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and the lumbering and forestry operations of both areas. And these were things that the Finns were familiar with and could do readily without much training. The climate in both New England and in Michigan, where the majority of the Finns first settled, was similar to that of Finland, with forests and lakes and cold winters. I will leave off there, and my colleagues will tell you much more about what happened to the Finns when they came here. But I'd like to tell you a few words about what Finland is like now. I was fortunate enough to spend a month there a year ago. Finland is now a prosperous Nordic nation with a very high standard of living. In fact, it has the highest rate of literacy in the whole world. The economy depends upon forest products, high quality of design in glass and ceramics, shipbuilding, and the manufacture of paper-making equipment. Finland is a social democracy with a very high level of social services. Finland's political balance is a very delicate one, being right next to the Soviet Union, but it looks to the West. 25% of its trade is with Russia, but its major trading partner is actually Great Britain. Finland is very international in outlook and is a staunch supporter of the United Nations. In fact, recently, in the past several decades, many of the forces keeping peace in various danger spots in the world have been led by Finnish generals. Perhaps Finland's internationalistic outlook is directly a result of the fact that Finland fought and lost 2 bloody wars with Russia, one in 1917, which ended it in its independence, and one in 1939 and 40. They realize from sad experience that war is a tragedy that they want to avoid. Today, Finnish and Swedish are both the national languages, although less than 10% of Finns speak Swedish. Lutheran is the official religion. In other words, the church maintains such records as those of births and marriages and deaths, but 10% are Russian Orthodox. Americans know of the Finns for a variety of reasons: for the sauna, which has caught on all over the United States, and for Finland's athletic prowess. Even today, people remember Finland's Olympic winner Paavo Nurmi, the flying Finn. With that, I will stop off, and we will go into the experience of the Finns when they come into this country, and Liisa will speak more.
Well, I am going to try to perform 2 miracles today. The first one is attempting to cover at least 344 years in 20 minutes. And the second one is to play the part of a scholar. As you know, we artists have other images among the people. So with that in mind, bear with me as I try to give you certain facts and figures. As a matter of fact, I simply entitled this presentation, "The Finnish Immigrants in America, a Selection of Facts." That's all I could come up with. Finnish immigrants, along with other ethnic groups, have come to America riding on the crest of the huge wave of mass migration, which began during the first quarter of the 19th century and continued well into the early part of the 20th century. During the period covering approximately 100 years, no less than 30 million immigrants found their way to America. Among the masses traveled also the Finns, pushed out of their native land by sometimes desperate needs and glaring wants, pulled by the glitter and promise of economic plenty in America, the Finns arrived. It is generally known that the greatest influx of immigrants from Finland occurred between the 1890s and the early 1920s, actually up to the beginning of World War I. The peak years for the Finnish immigration were 1902 and 3, 1905, 1909 and 10, and 1913. For example, in 1902, over 23,000 Finns applied for passports to emigrate from Finland. 90% of these came to the United States. These peak years of immigration were also economically strong years in America. The years of recession in this country, for example, the years of 1904 and 1908, drastically reduced the number of immigrants from Finland. The majority of early Finnish immigrants were men. Immigration records of Finland indicate that in 31 years, or actually from about 1893, the year when the official record keeping in Finland was started, to 1924, the beginning of the quota system in this country, only in 5 years, during 5 years, beginning with in 1916, were the women outnumbering the men. And even then, very, very slightly. Of the immigrants arriving between 1890 and 1910, 70 to 75% were single, 60% between ages of 16 and 30. In 1900, the ratio of the Finnish men to the Finnish women was 182 to 100. Ladies, those days are gone forever. In 1920, the ratio had dropped to about 132 men to 100 women. In terms of the sex ratio, the New England states were the most balanced. The greatest imbalances were in the lumbering and mining areas of the West. Although individuals made up the majority of the immigrant Finns, some families did also emigrate. For example, records indicate that in 1882, of the total number of Finns emigrating, 19.9% was composed of families. In 1909, the percentage of the families was 16.9%. Usually, Finns married Finns, although mixed marriages did occur. At this point, no clear statistics are available, at least not to this presenter. It may be that the language barrier, mentioned by Miriam here earlier, that often separated the Finns from other ethnic groups was also one reason why the Finns sought each other as marriage partners. After arriving in America, finding a job and feeling at least somewhat secure, the Finnish man began to look for a mate, while the Finnish woman made sure that he found her. One of the best ways to find a marriage partner was to join some social club, church, temperance, or working group related, or at least attend the functions of these various organizations. If this method was not feasible, the Finnish man resorted to advertising, utilizing the many Finnish language newspapers. And just in passing here, since 1876, Finns in America have published at least 224 newspapers and periodicals in their own native language, in addition to numerous calendars, yearbooks, and other publications. Of these, 22 were published in New England and 11 right here in Fitchburg. To illustrate this form of advertising is the following rather poetic appeal found in one of the early issues of the Raivaaja, the local Finnish language newspaper still published once a week. And I will quote, actually this is a quote from my own book. and the translation is mine, free translation. Hey, ye lovely Finnish maidens, ye verdant party maidens, look upon these lines. Soon we'll celebrate a wedding. There are two of us boys here, stone cutters, in good shape, to whom came a nice thought of having our own stove cleaners. Therefore, we favors mother's girls. We accept the company of anyone as long as she does not fight against socialism. If you send us a letter first, we'll answer you letter for letter. We also ask for your photograph. Photo for photo, we will answer you. This address may be lucky for us and will soon lead us to paradise. It is safe to assume that it did not take long for the second generation Finns to appear on the scene. The peak of the first and second generation Finnish Americans living in this country occurred in the year 1920. At that time, the total Finnish population was approximately 350,000. Not all the Finns who came to America remained. For example, it is estimated that between 1894 and 1909, over 220,000 Finns left their homeland, with the majority emigrating to America. Of these, about 70,000 returned to Finland during that same period of time. World War I drastically reduced the immigration from Finland. The enactment of the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 established a quota system which allowed only 471 Finns to enter the country between 1925 and 1929, and 566 thereafter annually. With the exception of the year 1928, this quota has never been filled. During the Depression years, slightly over 1,500 Finns applied for passports to America. Thousands had left for Finland. Between 1820 and 1940, the Finnish-born population dropped almost 23%. After 1940, the total number of immigrants decreased even further. There were few replacements for those Finns who died. By 1960, half of the immigrants were 66 years old or older. According to the 1960 United States Census, there were 53,168 Finland-born immigrants living in 51 states. Michigan had the largest population of over 7,000. Oklahoma, the smallest, with 8. Massachusetts ranked 5th with little over 5,000. Now, Finland-born population has continued to decrease. By 1970, it numbered around 45,000. Many Finns have moved to Florida, particularly the first and second generation Finns who have retired from regular employment. Today, Lake Worth, Lantana, and Newport Ricky have active Finnish communities. In addition, Florida is receiving a number of well-educated, financially stable, middle-class Finns from Finland. Many of these Finns come to Florida in search of investment possibilities. These are the new breed of immigrants. As was stated earlier, Finns have been in America for quite some time. The earliest known settlement of Finnish immigrants was founded on the present site of Wilmington, Delaware, in the New Sweden colony. Among the settlers arriving with the first expedition led by Peter Minuit in 1638 were a few timberman Finns. For centuries before this time, Finland had been politically and economically tied to Sweden, as we heard from Paula earlier, subject to the Crown of Sweden. In the 1580s, a migration of Finns to Sweden began. Between 1580 and 1630, approximately 12,000 to 13,000 Finns left Finland and migrated to Sweden. Because of laws decreed by the Swedish government prohibiting wasteful use of forests, the Finnish farmers who cleared the forest for arable land by burning it ran up against the law. Many were sentenced for insubordination and were deported to the New Sweden colony. Other expeditions followed. The Finnish population increased gradually. From the original settlements, many of the Finns migrated to the areas that are now a part of New Jersey and Pennsylvania. There is today in Chester, Pennsylvania, a memorial monument carved by Väinö Aaltonen, a well-known Finnish sculptor, and erected in 1938 in commemoration of the Finnish pioneers of Delaware River Valley in 1638. And just as a note of interest, let it be stated that among the early Finnish Americans of historical importance was Martin Martensson, or Marttinen, kin of John Morton, the last signer of the Declaration of Independence. It is also strongly suggested by some historians that the Finns were really the ones who created the log cabin prototype that became one of the landmarks in the early pioneer days of America. Alaska may boast of early Finnish immigrants also. On September 12, 1839, a young Finnish pastor, Uno Sugnaeus, left Finland as one of the passengers on the ship Nikolai, among mostly Russian and some Finnish passengers, and headed for Sitka, Alaska, then under Russian control. Once settled in Sitka, the young pastor established a Lutheran congregation which consisted of Finns, Swedes, Germans, and Estonians. Gradually, the Finnish settlement in Alaska grew. Here, as elsewhere, the Finns made their contributions. Among those serving Alaska were Admiral Arvid Adolf Etholen and his wife. Having had considerable status already in Finland, Admiral Etholen served as Governor General of Sitka from 1840 to 1845. As early as 1849, a sailor from Turku by the name of Herman Edwin Kohn took a passport to America, and a Mr. Hoberg and his wife obtained passports in August of the same year for a 3-year stay in America. By October of 1848, the people of Finland had heard of the California gold rush, and many adventurous sailors left their ship to seek gold. During the Crimean War, a number of sailors also found their way to America. In 1860, a Finnish ship by the name of Salomo docked in New York, and within a month and a half, 8 sailors jumped ship and disappeared somewhere in the East Coast. During the middle of the 1860s and after the Homestead Act, Finnish migration started from the Finnmark region of Norway, where Finns had migrated earlier. The Finns responded to the need of laborers in the Michigan copper mines and to the free farmlands provided by the Homestead Act. From Norway, the migration fever spread to the far north of Finland and gradually down south. American fever got hold of the Finns in the 1870s. The mass migration was on its way. According to research covering the period from 1893 to 1920, it is clear that approximately 67% of the immigrants came to America with working skills related to farming. Farm owners, farm workers, 12% came without fixed occupations. 6% worked in some form of domestic service. These were usually women. 9 had skills as craftsmen or factory workers. City dwellers, whose numbers increased toward the end of the mass migration movement, accounted for approximately 13% of the total immigration population. The newly arrived Finnish immigrants settled in those locations where employment was available, often guided there by Finns who had arrived earlier and were familiar with the work situation. By 1920, there were approximately 30,000 Finnish-born immigrants in Michigan, 29,000 in Minnesota, 14,500 in Massachusetts. New York followed with about 12,500, and so on down the line, with Washington, California, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Oregon supporting substantial Finnish settlements. Among the many qualities that characterize the Finnish immigrant are 2 that are outstanding. Research of all records and documents revealed that first and foremost he was a worker. Responsible, respected, ingenious, skilled, and productive. he has proven himself as possessing physical stamina and endurance, as well as an ability to creatively use his inner resources. The other outstanding quality characterizing the Finnish immigrant is his need to organize. Ditto. There we are. He is an organizer, driven by his need to survive and by his sensitivity to the democratic process of human interaction. The Finns have always fought for the preservation of independence and individual freedom while seeking ways and means of cooperation for the benefit of all. After arriving in America, the Finns immediately began to seek employment. In the early years of immigration, the work was often short-term or seasonal. There was no employment security. Much time was spent in traveling around in search of work. Most of the early immigrants worked in at least one of the following main areas of employment: mining and quarry work, textile mills and other factories, building trades, agriculture, forestry, domestic service. Some were able to work at their own business, usually a small neighborhood grocery store, sauna, a public sauna, or some other form of self-employment. These, however, were minimal in the early years. With the emergence of the cooperatives in the early part of the 20th century, many Finns found employment within those organizations. In Michigan, Montana, and Arizona, the Finns mined copper. In Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, they brought up iron ore. Coal was the product in Pennsylvania, Montana, Wyoming, and Washington. Gold and silver were obtained from the mines in South Dakota and Colorado. Mining was dangerous. In 1963, Finns were killed in a mine explosion in Schofield, Utah. 96 died in Hanna, Wyoming in 1903. But pay was good. For example, in 1880, a Finnish miner in America was able to earn as much or more as a clergyman in Finland during a working year. This provided enough incentive for the Finn to stay on the job even though it was dangerous, demanding, and hazardous to his health. New England, parts of the Midwest, and California provided work in the quarries, also dangerous. Because of lack of safety precautions or failures of mechanical equipment at the deep quarries, serious injuries, even death, were commonplace occurrences. Stone dust caused serious health problems for the worker. Silicosis and tuberculosis were common among the Finns. In New England, over the years, thousands of Finns have found employment in the factories. Some Finns have bought farms and successfully cultivated a variety of farm products for their own use as well as for the open market: blueberries, strawberries, cranberries, garden produce, dairy products, and poultry, to name a few. Finnish builders, carpenters, masons, and other craftsmen are widely known and respected as skilled workers in New England. So are also the Finnish women who work at domestic or institutional services, as well as in many demanding professions and places of public service. The Finnish cooperatives in New England have provided employment for thousands of Finns over the years through a variety of means. The day laborer as well as the bank president have been supported by the profits obtained through the cooperative enterprises founded and sustained by the Finns. Private businesses of the Finns in New England fall in definite groups. Through her research of all records, this writer has come up with 10 specific areas of concentration of Finnish businesses. And these 10 are as follows: food-related, clothing and personal care, healthcare, home building related, automotive, machinery related, and garages, legal aid, investment, security related, recreation, travel related, accommodations, and this includes the old boarding houses, publishing, and then the miscellaneous group. Through the study of the Finns in New England, it is possible to obtain a rather clear picture of the character and accomplishments of the Finns at large, of the Finns as they exist elsewhere in America. As a generalized picture of the Finns at work, a following quote might do nicely, and this again, I must say, is a quote from my own book. Bear with me. In the process of earning a living, the Finns have left their footprints all over New England. They have traveled from Maine to Rhode Island in search of work, and usually found it. They have contributed years of their lives in hard labor at the old New England mills, where in the early days low wages, long hours, and slowly creeping death went hand in hand. They have tilled the often rocky soil and enormously enriched the productivity of small New England farms. They have lifted their axes, brought down the timber, and raised homes, churches, halls, factories, and shopping malls all over New England. They have dug deep into the ground and lifted up granite and marble blocks for innumerable foundations, roads, and monuments. They have banded together for flourishing cooperatives and soloed in flights of private enterprise, experiencing the heights and crash landings of such ventures. They have abundantly given their service in countless trades, occupations, and professions. They have worked relentlessly to provide for their children opportunities to be educated for skilled jobs and professional fields, something the early immigrants never experienced themselves. The Finnish immigrants organized in 3 major areas, and I'll try to go a little bit faster. I think my 20 minutes are up. Religious, temperance, and socialist or worker movements. They also founded culturally oriented societies such as the Knights and the Ladies of Kaleva relatively early. Much of the organizational activity began somewhere in the Midwestern, North Central states and gradually spread into various Finnish communities elsewhere in America. Bypassing some of the general history of the Finnish organizations, a look at New England might prove profitable. For those interested in the history of Finnish American organizations, there are many resources available. Generally, the Finns organized first along religious lines and then became also involved in the temperance movement. As the needs and dissatisfactions among the Finnish workers grew, and as they received inspiration and support from the workers and members of the socialist group in Finland, the workers also began to organize. The most active period of organizational growth was between 1890s and 1910, perhaps into 1912 and 13. After this period of growth, the activities within the organizations flourished, continuing well into the 1930s and even into the 1940s, although there were periods of disastrous interruptions. The 1950s and the 1960s saw the disintegration and disappearance of much of the Finnish American organizational activity. In the 1970s and the 1980s, there has been a resurgence of interest in the Finnish ethnic heritage, often started by some of the 3rd or even 4th generations Finns. Applause to Jonathan. Now, New England has seen its share of Finnish American organizations. Between the early 1890s and the early 1980s, the New England Finns have established at least the following. And here I'm going to give you just a brief fact about research that I myself have done. And these are in the following groups. Churches. No less than 9 Suomi Synod congregations, at least 14 National Finnish Evangelical Lutheran congregations and preaching stations, no less than 17 Finnish Congregational or Mission Conference churches and preaching stations. The Apostolic Lutherans and the Finnish Pentecostals have had congregations and preaching stations in New England all along. Some Finnish language groups still exist. They have been and are Baptist Finns, Methodist, Adventist, and Unitarian Finns. It is safe to assume that the Finns in New England have established 50 or more congregations and preaching stations over the past years. Some of these still exist, providing services in the Finnish language. For example, the Messiah Lutheran Church, and the Finnish Bethel Assembly of God of Fitchburg conduct Finnish language services. Many congregations have Finnish language programs and carry on other organizational activities in Finnish even today. And I'm going to just briefly insert a very personal note, because I love the Finns, and it is in honor of this group of Finns and the group with which I associate very, very strongly, that I can stand here and say that the magnificent God of the universe is my God and my Lord. The Lord Jesus Christ is my personal Savior, and the Holy Spirit is my guide and my teacher, and I'm an immigrant on the planet Earth, and I'm on my way home. Thank you, Finnish people. The second group is, of course, the temperance societies. Uljaskoitto, noble endeavor, of Quincy is the grand old gentleman of this breed of Finns. Others have disappeared. However, there have existed at least 41 Finnish-founded temperance societies in New England, one temperance association, one temperance league. The names of some of these societies are revealing, disclosing the spirit in which they were founded. For example, Aamun Koitto, Daybreak of Fitchburg, Rauhan Aarre, Treasure of Peace of Gardner, Alku, Beginning of Maynard. Marlborough, New Hampshire had a Vuoriston Toivo, Mountain Hope. Waterford, Connecticut, Niemen Ruusu, Peninsula Rose. And Saaren Toivo, Island Hope, represent the hopes of the Finns in Vinyl Haven, Maine. The third group, Socialists, and Jonathan is going to talk about them. In at least 83 communities of New England, the Finnish Socialists established chapters. Over the years, these have disappeared or undergone many changes. One lasting monument to the efforts and ideals of the Finnish Socialists in New England is the Saimaa Society of Fitchburg. Although it no longer functions as a political organization, it does have roots that go deep into the beginning of the socialist movement among the Finns in America. Fourth, cultural. The Knights and Ladies of Kaleva of Fitchburg and Maynard represent the oldest forms of cultural preservation among the Finnish immigrants. The organization still active. These organizations are still active. Other cultural organizations have been added, for example, the Finnish Cultural Society of Fitchburg State College. The current cultural groups and organizations are widely known in this area. Fifth, the cooperatives. In addition of being means of employment, as has already been noted, the Finnish cooperatives have contributed enormously to the community at large through their educational programs as well as their recreational programs. The big three in Fitchburg have been the United Cooperative Society of Fitchburg, the United Cooperative Farmers, and the Workers' Credit Union. The last two are still functioning. Within and in conjunction with all of the above major areas of concentration have existed an unbelievable number of subgroups ranging from women's sewing circles to top-notch marching bands. The range, the variety, the scope of activity, the talent, the energy, and the accomplishments of these subgroups forces one to stand back in awe and respect. The early immigrants accepted and utilized their own creative powers to the utmost. A worthy legacy indeed. We need to retain, cherish, and protect this invaluable legacy. The story of the Fitchburg Finns is relatively widely known, at least among the Finns. The Finns in Fitchburg have made positive and generous contributions to the community at large through their work, through participation in community and civic affairs, and through their talents freely given and shared. Leaders have emerged from within the organizations and groups, widely known among the Finns throughout the Finnish communities of New England and elsewhere in America, if not among other ethnic groups. People such as Oskari Topoi of Fitchburg, Väinö Hoover of California, or Eero Saarinen from all over the United States, become internationally known. But the majority of the leaders among the Finnish immigrants tend to shy away from public acclaim. Needless to say, there are a number of renowned Finns in the field of public service, education, the arts, music, theater, visual arts, and architecture, and in business. On the whole, however, Finns tend not to have any superstars, just a group of solid, steady leaders dispersing their energies in cooperative efforts, while at the same time quietly pursuing their own paths of self-actualization. And I will close with this. It is the masses, the Finnish immigration population as a whole, who deserve to be noted. The Finnish immigrants have left their imprint in the cultural composite of America. Perhaps the following statement, again taken from the work of this presenter, has a message for all of us. Were one to ask an old-timer what the contemporary Finnish American ought to know, feel, and cherish about the cultural preserved for him, one might get an answer such as this. Remember, we came with nothing. We gave our best so that you would have something on which to stand in the new world. We ask for very little and accomplished much. You may build upon or you may destroy that which has been given you. The choice is yours, and so are the results. Thank you, and thank you for being patient.
Doris Kirkpatrick has written in the book Around the World in Fitchburg, many of the younger generation were not even aware of the ancient dream that once burned so brightly in the hearts of fiery young idealistic immigrants. Franz Ratila, John H. Garvonen, Oskari Tokoi, Henry Putternen, and others of their generation were gone and fast being forgotten. I entitled my remarks today as a heritage discovered. The fact that I, a half-third and half-fourth generation Finnish American, am here today giving this talk is because I have become quite fascinated by the story of Finnish immigration to America. This interest in my roots was sparked by my discovery of a culture, a real subculture in fact, that the Finns had developed in Fitchburg and their other settlements around the country during the first half of this century. This subculture has just about vanished altogether, and it has prompted me to want to find out what it was like in its heyday. I became really interested in my ethnic heritage when at college during the mid-1970s. It was during this decade that there was an outburst of interest all over the country in our rich and diverse ethnic heritage. This interest has produced a new approach to the study of immigration history, and this interest has continued to this day to inspire programs like the Fitchburg Mosaic. This new enthusiasm for studying the ethnic past has not passed by Finnish Americans. The second, third, and fourth generation, along with some scholars in Finland, have actively become researching and re-examining the story of their immigrant forebears. This new research has produced a veritable flood of books. The Finn Factor in American Culture, Labor, and Society by Karl Ross, The Forging of Finnish American Communism by Alvo Kostiainen, and Blueberry God by Reino Hannula, just to name a few. These books present a new perspective of the Finnish experience in America. Much of this new research and re-examination focuses on the active participation of the Finns in the labor struggles and the radical movements in America during the early 1900s. It is only natural that some of the younger generations of Finnish Americans be interested in learning about this chapter of their heritage. For in the past, this was a chapter that was forgotten or hidden from view. The Red Scare after World War I pushed it into the closet, and the McCarthyism of the 1950s closed the door. But now the door has been opened, and this radical tradition, the tradition of the free thinkers, the union organizers, the cooperators, the socialists, the wobblies, and the communists, is being acknowledged and studied. To be sure, certainly not all Finnish immigrants participated in the left-wing movements of their day. Only a minority did. However, when you compare the Finns, so small in number as they were, with the other ethnic groups, this minority was way out of proportion. The fact that so many Finns did choose to be involved with and support the various forms of radicalism is very unique in our country's ethnic history. This involvement must indeed be studied in order to gain a true understanding of the forces that shaped the Finnish community. Before 1900, as we have heard, the three major types of organizations that were started by Finnish immigrants were the churches, temperance societies, and workers' clubs. These workers' clubs of the 1890s, two of them were, the earliest were Imatra, founded in Brooklyn, New York in 1891, and Fitchburg Labor Society, founded in 1894, were not socialist in ideology. Organized very much like a fraternal order, these clubs were dedicated to providing mutual aid for the unemployed, sick, and needy members, promoting good behavior, and supporting social reform. To many immigrants, joining a workers' club became the alternative to joining a church or temperance society. For various reasons, most Finns, the number has been estimated between 66 and 75%, did not care to become really involved with organized religion in America. And while temperance was definitely recognized as an important virtue, it alone did not solve all the problems of immigrant life. So workers' clubs became an important gathering place, a place where the immigrant could listen and discuss new ideas. Of these new ideas, the one that was going to have the greatest effect on the Finnish community was socialism. To understand why, try to imagine what it must have been like in Europe and America in the early 1900s. The buildup of the great industrial complex had forever changed society. It was a time of social ferment. Working people started to question a system in which so few benefited from the labor of so many. What did the workers receive for their long hours of toil? Almost nothing. Very low wages and, of course, no benefits of any kind. So it was in the late 1890s and the early 1900s that some workers realized that this certainly couldn't go on. They were inspired by the writings of Karl Marx and his disciples. An international labor movement was born. Workers of the world unite became the slogan. You have nothing to lose but your chains and a world to gain. In Finland, socialism found some acceptance and became part of the developing labor movement. In America, it also found adherents. In the early 1900s, the Socialist Party became the largest third party. Its perennial presidential candidate, Eugene V. Debs, received almost 1 million votes in 1912 and 1920. At this time, many well-known Americans were socialists, including Carl Sandburg, Helen Keller, and Jack London. However, a socialist party never became part of the mainstream politics here like it did in Finland and other European countries. It is quite conceivable, then, that Finns might have never become involved with socialism in America. They probably wouldn't have, except for two major factors: events in Finland and conditions in America. In 1899, Tsar Nicholas II implemented his Russification program against Finland. His agents proceeded to crush the rising nationalist and labor movement. This situation forced the departure of many socialist leaders and activists. They came to America and found some fertile ground for their ideas. It was because America was the world's last best hope. Here the Finnish immigrant found himself on the bottom of the economic heap. For the most part unskilled in speaking an incomprehensible language, they got the worst jobs in the New World had to offer. Long, hard hours were spent in the coal mines of Wyoming, the iron mines of Minnesota's Mesabi Range, Michigan's copper mines, the lumber woods of the north, and the sweatshops of the east. jobs with terrible conditions and lowest pay. Even in America, it seemed that the almighty dollar was more important than human welfare. So, as I mentioned, the workers' clubs were full of discussion about socialism and the labor movement. A growing number of these clubs wanted to affiliate with the Socialist Party, the only party in America at the time which really proposed changes that would make the lives of working men and women better, and that by joining this party they would become part of the American workers' movement. Joining the Socialist Party was the action advocated by Fitchburg's Sima Labor Society. Brooklyn's Imatra, on the other hand, wanted to organize solely as a Finnish club and not join any American organization. Sima's point of view eventually won out. In 1906, at a convention in Hibbing, Minnesota, representatives of the workers' clubs from all over the country established the Finnish Socialist Federation. This federation affiliated with the Socialist Party and became the first foreign language federation of the party, and it was also the largest foreign language federation the party ever had. From 1906 to 1914, the federation's was the federation's golden age. By 1913, its membership had grown to over 12,000 in 260 locals across the country. It operated a college, the Work People's College in Minnesota, and the Federation had 3 official newspapers, the Raivaya, the Pioneer in Fitchburg, the Työmies, Working Man in Superior, Wisconsin, and Toveri, Comrade in Astoria, Oregon, along with many other affiliated publications, including Toverita, which was the Woman Comrade, a newspaper for working women. During this golden age, though, the Finnish socialist movement was much, much more than a political or labor movement. It was a way of life. Most of the socialist activity is centered around their hall. The Finn Hall was not an invention of the socialist Finns, of course. You might say that, though, that form of expression, cultural expression known as the Finn Hall, reached its zenith under their direction. The Socialist Finn Hall became a substitute church for those who didn't go to church. Itinerant agitators known as apostles traveled from hall to hall, spreading the gospel of socialism. There were Sunday schools where the children were taught to consider themselves part of the international labor movement. The faithful looked forward to the coming new social order. And of course, weddings and funerals were held at the hall. And then there was all the other activity, the dances, bands, orchestras, choruses, dramatic groups, athletic clubs, sewing circles, lecture and debate societies, and agitation committees. To be sure, it was much of this activity that, more than the hall's affiliation with socialism, that attracted many Finns. But no matter how interested in socialism they may or may have not been, they were definitely exposed to its ideas. Of course, a lot of Finns were certainly proud of being identified with that movement. You can see this by looking at the old photographs. There are photos of the halls which prominently display the sign Socialist Hall, and then there was the studio portraits of mother, father, and baby sitting next to a sign with a seal of the Socialist Party on it, along with Merry Christmas and Happy New Year on it. The Finnish Socialist Federation flourished as a united movement. However, it didn't last for long. Two major conflicts brought about its demise. The first was in 1914 over the question of industrial unionism. The Socialist Party decided it could no longer support the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the advocate of one big union. The Finnish Federation also adopted this attitude, so about 3,000 IWW supporters, or wobblies as they were called, in the Federation quit or were expelled. This split hurt the Federation for sure, but it wasn't nearly as severe as the next one. In 1917, the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia. This revolution captivated the hearts of many American radicals. Like it was so well portrayed in the recent movie Reds, many of them thought that worldwide revolution was imminent, and they wanted to be part of it. Most of the members of the Finnish Socialist Federation came to feel the same way. The Bolshevik victory, along with the defeat of Finland's revolutionary government in the Civil War of 1918, convinced them that communism was the way to go. They no longer wanted to be members of the Socialist Party, as they felt the times called for more revolutionary ideas. In December 1920, the Finnish Federation then voted to sever its ties with the Socialist Party, and 2 years later, the Federation became affiliated with a new legal communist party, the Workers' Party. At this time, the Finns were the largest foreign language group in the Workers' Party, amounting to a little over 40% of the total membership. However, not all members of the Socialist Federation wanted to forsake their social democratic ideals and leave the party. This faction, numbering a little over 3,000, and mostly from the eastern United States, especially Massachusetts, withdrew from the Federation and remained in the Socialist Party. So there you have it. By the early 1920s, the once united Finnish working class movement had been divided up into three warring factions. Now there were socialist halls, there were wobbly halls, and there were communist halls. A socialist newspaper, a wobbly newspaper, and three communist papers. Since that time, this divided working class movement has almost behaved like an old soldier. It really never died, it just faded from view. From our perspective today, then, what does this story of the working class movement mean to us? And what is its legacy? First of all, Finns became legendary for their participation in strikes during the early 1900s. You don't have to agree with their ideas to admire their courage. The courage for that this small group of immigrants needed to challenge the robber barons and the status quo of that era. Secondly, a lot has been written about the Finns being a clannish group, always keeping to themselves. However, this wasn't always the case. Finns attempted to work with other Americans and ethnic groups while they formed unions, organized strikes, and participated in political activities. Third, the labor Finns were important in the cooperative movement. They were the driving force in organizing and developing co-ops all over the country. And finally, these radical Finns worked for things which today even the most arch-conservative takes for granted. Things like the 8-hour day, the child labor laws, women's suffrage, workmen's compensation, Social Security. Then there was also the right to unionize and the right to strike. During the early 1900s, these were dangerous ideas. Many people were hated, insulted, blacklisted, arrested, and yes, sometimes even murdered because they believed in such things. And some of these people were Finns. From my research and study so far, I have found that these Finnish immigrant socialists, wobblies, and communists weren't the so awful people and dangerous and people that some made them out to be. Their dreams of socialism, industrial unionism, or even communism, idealistic and naive though they were not dreams of world domination or power. They were dreams of a world with a better life for the plain working women and men. Thank you.
We'd be very happy to take any questions from the audience now. Are there questions?
From what research I've done so far, there's not been too much on that level. It's seen that they originally started to organize along the social democratic lines because that was the main influence. They were originally along those lines because the leadership came originally from Finland, and that's where they picked up more of the input of radical ideas, and they moved to associate themselves with the American counterparts of these movements in Finland. So there was no really large anarchistic movement in Finland, so they weren't really involved in that. And a lot of the times the Finns were very democratic minded. They didn't want to take into really revolutionary methods. so to the fact that even when they became communists, when the Comintern would order them to do something, they were very reluctant. Even it was tearing the hearts out of these communist Finns to be ordered by the Comintern to do something, but yet they were still so democratic that they felt they should be deciding what they wanted to do rather than anyone else. So it just seems that they weren't involved because the influence was coming from Finland rather than this country. Does that answer?
Are there other questions?
Well, there might have been. It's hard to really pin down who you want to say is a communist or who is not. They're not running around proclaiming it usually. Some research has been done on the Finns were primarily attracted to the communist movement back when it first started in this country in the 1920s. As time went on, like we've seen, the immigrant population got less and less because of deaths and no more immigration coming into this country. And the Finns that were originally in the communist movement became disenchanted with it. They were expelled because of their democratic ideas. They were a few of them went back to Soviet Karelia in the 1930s because they were going to build the new empire over there, and they came back with terrible stories of how they were treated. And then some were expelled because, well, some quit because they no longer could fit in with that group. So by the 50s, the actual numbers actually consider themselves communists. I have no idea of knowing because there's no research yet been done. It's hard to really, I think, generalize on it. Well, you can easily generalize that because most of the second generation, the other immigrants, tended to turn away from, if they had radical parents, most of them weren't very proud of that. They were considered, they want to get away from that as much as they could. So the current would follow pretty much mainstream, I would think, with what a lot of most other people, they vote by the candidate often as much as anything else, because there's no, the difference has been, a lot of I'd say it still has been aligned with Democratic Party since Roosevelt era, because when he came into the government, it started the changes in ideas that were actively supported by Finnish people. Earlier it was the Republican Party because they were sided with the other parts of the group, so it's mostly Democratic, I would say, partially, and then you still have, strong Republican too, so it's hard to really generalize.
There are no. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liisa, Paula, and Jonathan. And now I'd like to tell you that we're going to have the traditional Finnish coffee and pulla upstairs in the mezzanine. And as you're going up there, don't neglect to look at the exhibits that are in the Finnish exhibits that are in the cases throughout the library. And I want to thank especially Hilma Siskonen and Aura Lohi for preparing this coffee for us today with their assistance, and also Onirva Lovejoy and Eiley Walsh for the exhibits. They're responsible for the exhibits. And I do want to tell you that the Finnish Committee is going to be very busy this summer working with Gunther Hus from the college on our slides. And we will be having a slide presentation and a Finn Hall type of program on October 31st, or tentatively scheduled anyway for October 31st here. So thank you for coming on such a beautiful May day.